Filter modulation is maybe the most foundational technique in sound design, built into almost every synthesizer under the sun. Yet the breadth and depth of different timbres you can get out of the simplest sounds by just making the right kind of filter move in the right kind of way can take lifetimes to fully explore. Much like the technique of filter modulation itself then, pan filter tools concepts appear simple on the surface. Some filters you can modulate, but it comes with a lot of depth, including stereo modulation and offsets, an abundance of filter types, a very advanced modulation system, and completely configurable routing between its three filters. Since a lot of this plugin's nuances happen in the stereo field, wearing headphones for this video's audio demos is highly recommended. Before we get into the fancy stuff, let's start real simple. Each filter has three basic controls you can set via the three top knobs in the UI. What exactly these are depends on the filter type you select at the center top panel, and you will be able to see their labeling change accordingly. Let's start with the low pass, which comes with cutoff, resonance, and mix controls. Now here comes what turns this plugin from just a filter tool into a pan filter tool. The second row of knobs allows us to offset each of the three basic controls between left and right speaker. On the spectrum analyzer and with your ears, you will be able to follow how a low pass filter will start moving independently between the two stereo channels. The third and last row of knobs then is used to scale the second row's offset. Moved all the way to the left, the offsets are multiplied by 0 and have no effect. Moved all the way to the right, our set offset is exaggerated beyond the value of the second row of knobs. If the multiply knob is set to the center, our offset is taken at face value. Now, as with most things in music, when filters get really interesting is when they start moving. Pan filter tool has 4 slots for modulators that can each be set to one of 7 modulator types. Let's start with a simple LFO, mapped to the filter cutoff stereo offset parameter. There are 6 LFO shapes available, whose frequency can be set either in hertz or in musical values. Where this gets really interesting, however, are the warp modes that let us bend, wiggle, skew, pinch, pulse width modulate, quantize, wave shape, or hard sync, the low frequency oscillator, twice a modulator. And of course the warping parameter itself can be modulated. For example, by a second LFO. You can see already how things can get pretty complex if we feel like it. The sequence modulator lets us create a sequence of up to 16 steps, which we can choose to leave as sudden jumps or smooth out. The MIDI modulator lets you use all kinds of incoming MIDI information to control the filters. We can use it to make any of the plugin's parameters respond to the pitch, velocity or pitch wheel of any incoming MIDI signal. In this case, I'm using the note track to make the filter cutoff follow the note I'm playing. The envelope also responds to incoming MIDI signals by triggering an ADSR envelope for each incoming note. The left 4 controls work exactly as you would expect them to from any synth's ADSR envelope, while the 3 additional tension controls allow you to fine-tune the dynamic curvature of each stage of the envelope. The level modulator is an envelope follower. It reacts to the incoming signal's volume envelope, with options to filter for specific frequency areas of the incoming signal, and smooth it out with attack and release controls. We will revisit this later in our patch demo section to create a little wah-wah pedal effect. The map modulator is a remap that lets you process the output from another modulator by remapping it through a function and slew limiting it with attack and release controls. This is especially useful if you want to use one modulation signal for multiple destinations, but first want to adjust it a little for each target. I'll point out here again that all aspects of this function are modulatable themselves. And last, but certainly not least, we have the chaos modulator. As the name suggests, this is a kind of random sample and hold LFO, although it may look a little unusual. The controls on the left create a pattern of random noise at a given interval. 3 different types of noise can be chosen at the top. The noise is then sampled at an interval specified by the controls on the right, either by continuously scanning through the noise texture or discretely jumping around in it. Continuous mode is really where the type of noise will matter, since the shapes of the noise will be the gestures of your LFO. This LFO signal can then be smoothed out by using attack and release control, and mapped to pretty much any parameter you want. As mentioned before, Pan Filter Tools comes with a whole arsenal of filter types to choose from, accessible via the top center menu. There are 4 categories. Basic are all the filter types you will already be familiar with. Low pass, high pass, band pass, and band stop or notch filters, with 5 different pole counts. The pole count in each case determines the filter steepness. In other plugins you may have seen this expressed as a dB per octave parameter before. In the second category we find Chebyshev versions of our conventional filters. Chebyshev filters are something you encounter a bit less frequently in audio software. The main difference between them and their basic equivalents lies in the shape of the filter slope. If we swap back and forth between a basic and a Chebyshev low pass, we will notice 2 main changes. Most importantly, the Chebyshev cutoff is a lot sharper. And secondly, we get what are called ripples in the passband, a slight unevenness in the frequencies led through by the filter. Which of the 2 you choose really just comes down to which sound you prefer. The basic filters will sound a lot more like what you'll be used to from other software, but you may enjoy the sharp edges of the Chebyshevs. In the next category we find a whole host of specialty filters, including a peak that resembles a bell boost you'll know from an EQ. The all-pass filters only affect the phase but not the frequency response of a signal. You won't really hear much of a difference at first, besides a little squishiness on a sound's attack. But when they get very interesting is when they are either modulated, especially in stereo, or mixed in parallel with a sound. Because an all-pass filter in parallel, as you may know, becomes a phaser. In the miscellaneous row you can find a comb filter and a gain control, as well as ring mod and AM filters, which are basically different ways of modulating the amplitude of a signal so fast that it creates different partials. In the last category we can find all kinds of combinations of the previous filters. A personal favorite of mine being many notch filters combined into one. I'll leave this for you to explore in depth on your own, there's a lot to discover here. An additional layer of complexity comes from the fact that Pan Filter Tool doesn't just offer 1, but 3 filters. Each filter's controls can be accessed by clicking on the little ABC button on the top right of the UI. Keep in mind that you will need to activate filters B and C first, using the Enable button on the top left. Importantly, the audio routing between these three filters can be freely configured. By default, the filters are routed in serial, meaning audio passes from filter A to filter B to filter C, as can be seen from the little white lines in the routing graph. To make the filters all run in parallel, we want to make sure that each filter receives audio from the input and also directly outputs audio to the plugin's audio output, while no audio passes in between the three filters. As you can see, the vertical lines are now grayed out, while the horizontal lines show signal flow from left to right independently for each filter. Here's a simple example to illustrate these principles. Let's set filter A to a high pass and filter B to a low pass filter. In our default serial routing, together they will become a kind of band pass filter, as you can see. In parallel, however, depending on the filter cutoff, the high pass and low pass parts of the signal will not affect each other, so they will become a kind of notch filter. Importantly now, completely serial and completely parallel are only two of many possible configurations of the three filters. And of course, where it gets really interesting is that each of these routing parameters can be modulated. So here's an example where I'm modulating back and forth between serial and parallel configurations of filters A and B. To finish off, I just want to leave you with a few simple patch ideas, to put the theory we discussed into practice and get you thinking about the possibilities to explore. Alright, let's start with the popular guitar pedal effect, which is the wah-wah pedal. This is basically just a modulated bandpass filter, so what we'll start with is by just getting a bandpass filter here and placing it on the guitar sound. And then what we want to do is we want to modulate this with the level of the sound, so using the level modulator. And kind of fine-tune the cutoff and the modulation amount here so we get a nice wah-wah effect. Also, we might want to set the modulation to unipolar by clicking these little arrows here, so it only goes up. And this is a simple wah-wah pedal effect. We could also, of course, introduce an LFO, put that on the cutoff. And then, I don't know, maybe let's use the level to just speed up the LFO slightly, because we might as well, just because we can. And then, of course, let's use the stereo offset to maybe assign another LFO to it. Just kind of pans around a little bit. Could even use the multiplier here to scale that back a little bit. Another simple effect we could create is something I hinted at earlier, which is a stereo phaser. So we want to use an all-pass filter here. We're not really gonna hear much of a difference between the all-pass and not all-pass sounds in this case on this sound. But if we mix it in parallel, you can see we get this phaser-like series of notch filters. And then we can modulate the stereo offset here to kind of make the two filter banks move independently on left and right speaker. So we get this kind of interesting panning phasery effect. And then of course we could also modulate other parameters like maybe the resonance or even the mix if we want to bring it in and out. So here's a technique I use sometimes when making neuro basses, just having a bunch of modulated bandpass filters in parallel. So what we're gonna do is, first of all, we're just gonna go to the routing here and establish parallel routing for the three filters. So having each have their own independent inputs and outputs. And then we can start with a bandpass filter. So let's place the first bandpass filters and let's use Chebyshevs just because we can on all three filters. And then we're gonna start making each of these move independently. So the way that I'm gonna do this is just with a chaos LFO. So it's like a slightly generative sort of approach. We're gonna use, let's use the cellular noise and regenerate it at quite a slow frequency because I don't want as much jumpiness in here. And then kind of scan through it. And you can see the kind of LFO shape we are getting here at the top, the bottom, and add a bit of attack and release time to smooth it out. And then we can map that to our first cutoff. And then we can do that for all three of our bandpass. Of course, there are many more things to try, examples of which can be found in the plugin's many presets, but I'll leave those for you to explore for yourself.